Hello to anyone watching this. I think while the character roster is the most exciting part of any Mario game, the most interesting series to keep up with is definitely Mario Party. Just seeing who gets invited or uninvited year on year and just keeping track of the priorities of the developers in terms of who's hot and who's not. So today I just wanted to go through every Mario Party game and sort of look at how the rosters have improved or not improved and sort of rationalise why this happened, and then just rank all of them based on how much of an evolution they are from the other games in the series. But this isn't going to be about how rosters could have been improved in any way. This is just about what we got and how it compares to everything else that we've got. And I'm only going to count the main multiplayer rosters for each game. I'm not going to count things like Donkey Kong being a part of Super Duel mode in Mario Party 5 or the Mii's being a part of Mario Party 8. This is just the main roster of each game. So getting straight into it, Mario Party 1's roster is interesting because while it's obviously limited, there's not really much else you could have done at that point. Like, pretty much every other main character was a part of the game in another aspect, so they couldn't have been playable without it getting confusing. So it's an understandable roster to start with, but the only way was up, really. Or to the side, as Mario Party 2's roster is the exact same, which again, there wasn't really any way around it at that point, but it's still a shame that it had to be the same when so many other parts of the game were massively evolved from the first entry. The fact that the character roster could be improved, it's a bit of a letdown, but there's not much you could have done. But that wasn't an issue by the time of Mario Party 3, as Waluigi and Daisy had obviously started to become more mainstays to the spin-off games, so it made sense to add them to Mario Party, and I think they add the perfect spice to the roster. Especially for just being an N64 game, I think they're the perfect final two characters. But they're not the perfect two final characters when you jump up a generation. Because that's the big issue with Mario Party 4, like there was no reason to not add more characters when like Birdo had become a pretty established character at this point. So to keep the same roster of A is just really disappointing when you're on such more powerful hardware. But Mario Party 5 is where things start to get really interesting, as while Donkey Kong obviously is put to rest, his replacements are perfect. You couldn't ask for better representations of the goodies and the baddies, and especially where the previous two new characters were human, to have 3 non-human characters is just perfect. While Mario Party 6's additions weren't quite as spectacular, and there's nothing that irks me quite as much as an odd-numbered character roster, I do still think that Toadette's just a really sweet addition, especially because she was such a recent creation. She'd only been invented the previous year, so to see her already moving outwards to other series is just nice to see. While Mario Party 7 obviously has the second character cut of the series with Koopa Kid, I mean, who wouldn't want to be replaced by Birdo and Drybones? They're just such inherently interesting characters. I'm so glad the developers thought to add in. They just make the roster feel so perfectly rounded, and not just because it's gone back up to an even number. And with Mario Party 8, there's just no notes. It's just always satisfying to have 2 unique enemy characters just chucked in for no reason other than the fact that they're fun to have around. Like, that's what you want out of every subsequent roster. So to actually have that, it just feels perfect. Especially with Hammer Bro being more of a normal turtle character. He feels like a much more direct replacement for Koopa Kid compared to the characters from Mario Party 7, so it sort of feels like he's been added back in that tiny way. But Mario Party 9 is where the roster starts to get really shaken up, because obviously ND Cube took over development, and while it is understandable that 2 of the roster slots got cut, because Mario Party 8 most likely used the same engine as Mario Party 7, so they could carry everything and everyone over, the cuts that they still made to the roster are quite interesting, especially characters like Toadette and Drybones that really seemed like mainstays at this point. To have them swapped out is just curious, but it's still fun to clock the priorities of these devs, and I think it was a good idea to take Koopa Troopa and Shy Guy and Kamek out of their usual sort of supporting roles where you wouldn't be able to play as them because they were busy doing other things, and to make them just playable for once. I think that's fun, and there's no reason to not appreciate them for turning up. But never mind, they've been cut from Mario Party 10 in order to make way for previous mainstays, as well as Rosalina, who was overdue to be added even at that point, and Spike, who is one of the best video game characters, let alone Mario characters, so it's just right for him to be added. I don't know what missing link in evolution it took to get us from a 12 character roster to a 20 character roster, but I'm certainly not complaining. I mean, this roster has pretty much any enemy you can hope for, except for Spike. I mean, he's just too powerful to have for more than one game, I guess. But it's just literally the perfect roster. Once again, no notes. There's no way to go up from this. But there are ways to go down, as Superstar shows. Like, it's understandable that several of the enemies got cut because they're taking side roles in the game again, but multiple of the characters from Super were available. They're not in any other place in the game, they just didn't feel like adding them back, which is disappointing, but I mean, literally just having Birdo saves this roster. Now I'm going to get on to all the handheld games, and I hold these in sort of a different regard, because obviously as the consoles are less powerful, you're not going to have as many characters, so I feel like it's better to sort of segregate them, sort of put them to their own standard. Although obviously Advance didn't have any standards. I mean, I have no idea how powerful the GBA is, I have no idea if they could have done more characters, but it's just sort of seeing 4 characters, it's just sort of inherently disappointing, even though if it wasn't really avoidable. DS is obviously far better. It features what I like to call the Core 8, which were the 8 characters that appeared in literally every single Mario Party game up until the Switch. So it's just a really nice, well-rounded group. Even if you wish more characters could appear, you can't exactly complain when you're on the DS to only have 8 characters. I really love Island Tour's roster. It's just really satisfying because it's essentially Mario Party 5's roster, except with an obvious modernisation to Koopa Kid. It's just a really nice lot to have in any game, and it feels sort of appropriate because obviously 3DS was sort of similar power to the GameCube and all that, so it just feels like a nice callback more than anything to have this sort of roster. Despite how much of a travesty Star Rush is, I do really appreciate its roster, as obviously pretty much all of the baddies were off being a boss or some sort of side host. It's just nice to have a roster that's completely focused on goodies again, especially having Diddy Kong in the mix, which was surprisingly his first ever time being playable, so it just makes the roster feel really well-rounded. You know, everyone has a partner, except for Yoshi and Rosalina, but they can just be the odd couple. Now, I'm always the first to come to the defense of the top 100 in pretty much every aspect, except for its character roster, because this just makes literally no sense to me. Like, I don't get why Toad and Toadette both had to be hosts, or why the DK minigames had to be Donkey Kong's only appearance in the game, that he couldn't have been, like, swapped out or just turned the DK minigames into little dual minigames so we could have still been in the roster with Diddy Kong or something. It just felt like there was so many easy ways to avoid such a tiny roster, but they just refused to take them. Now it's time to rank them, and I'm not going to necessarily put them in order of quality. I'm going to put them in sort of the order of how they evolved or devolved compared to the previous entries, and sort of group them up based on that. So at the bottom we have the games that just barely even have rosters for one reason or another. Just the ones that feel so minuscule when they could have either had more or shouldn't have even really existed. It's just sort of the rosters that disappoint in pretty much all aspects. Next to the stagnant rosters that don't add anything pretty much for no reason. Like, they're acceptable in a bubble, but when you put them next to the previous game, you sort of wish they could have been more. Next to the basic rosters, the ones that are just there, it's understandable why they're like this. They're sort of the first in a chain, so you can't really complain about them. You just get what you're given and enjoy whoever you have. Then it's the games that actively took steps to improve, the ones that feel a lot more satisfying just by having a couple additions that really round out the roster. Next to the rosters of 10 or so that are sort of either incremental improvements to previous games or are just satisfying sort of refreshed rosters, sort of basic picks alongside a couple of more exciting picks to just make it feel overall well-rounded, if sort of wishing that you could have one or two more if possible. Next are all the rosters with 12 characters, because these are all just really satisfying, especially for the time that each of them came out. They are just the perfect selection of 12 you could ask for. And at the top, it's sort of no contest really, the big boy rosters with more characters than anyone else. 8 obviously has the benefit of constantly being incremental, but Super Mario Party just went above and beyond just because it felt like doing so really, and I'll always appreciate it for that. But yeah, that's everything. If you have any questions or concerns, let me know. It's just I've always found a lot of fascination in Mario rosters, especially for Mario Party, where it'll always keep changing based on the developers or the console. I've just always found it so fascinating, so I just wanted to take this chance to just talk about it and sort of go over it in a more succinct manner than just thinking about it, you know? But bye bye, have a nice day.